The massive space station Kepler-7 rotated slowly against the backdrop of three purple suns, its chrome and crystal surfaces gleaming like a jewel in the void. Inside its gleaming corridors, beings from across the galaxy hurried between classes, their various forms of locomotion creating a symphony of clicks, hums, and whispers. Hannah Kim adjusted her worn backpack as she navigated through the crowd, her simple Earth-made boots silent against the polished floor. Around her, floating Etherian gas clouds drifted past like living aurora, while eight-legged Karathi scuttled along designated pathways with nervous energy. The insectoid Zephyrians moved in perfect formation, their compound eyes constantly scanning for threats. What made this scene remarkable wasn't the diversity of alien life. It was how they all subtly moved away from the small human girl walking among them. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when she passed. Tentacles, claws, and energy appendages quickly withdrew from her path. Even the massive Thurian rock beings, standing 3 meters tall, stepped aside with surprising grace. The Galactic Academic Consortium had accepted its first human student only after months of heated debate. Earth had been classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, a planet so hostile that survival required adaptations most species considered impossible. The decision to admit Hana had sparked protests from 17 different star systems. Professor Veltar's crystalline form clicked and chimed as he floated down the corridor toward his lecture hall. The Kalari were known throughout the galaxy for their intellectual superiority and elegant biological design. His forearms moved in perfect synchronization, each one capable of independent thought processes. His species had achieved spaceflight, when most others were still crawling in primordial oceans. The professor's mandibles twitched as he reviewed his student roster on a holographic display. 43 students from prestigious families across 12 star systems. All except one had been carefully selected based on genetic compatibility, intellectual capacity, and proper evolutionary development. Then there was the human. Inside the vast lecture hall, students filed into their assigned seats with practiced precision. The Etherian gas beings settled into special containment fields that allowed them to maintain cohesion. Zephyrian hive clusters arranged themselves in geometric patterns that facilitated their collective consciousness. The aquatic Nereid students submerged into water-filled observation pods. Hana entered last, her simple human clothing stark against the elaborate environmental suits and biomodifications of her classmates. She had chosen a seat in the back corner, not out of shyness but because every other student had instinctively avoided that entire section of the hall. Empty chairs formed a 3-meter radius around her position. As she settled into her seat, Hana pulled out what appeared to be primitive equipment by galactic standards, a basic digital tablet and a simple stylus. While other students interfaced directly with quantum computers through neural links or telepathic connections, the human girl relied on manual input devices that seemed laughably outdated. Professor Veltar's 4 eyes swept across the lecture hall, noting with satisfaction the perfect attendance and orderly arrangement of his students. His gaze lingered on the isolated corner where Hana sat, and his crystalline voice carried a note of disdain when he began his opening lecture. "Welcome to Advanced Xenobiology," he announced, his words echoing through specialized translation, fields that converted his crystalline harmonics into languages comprehensible to each species present. In this course, we will examine the magnificent diversity of life that has evolved across our galaxy through proper selective pressures and elegant environmental adaptation. The professor's form shifted colors, displaying complex biological diagrams directly on his crystalline surface. We will study how superior civilizations have achieved peak evolutionary efficiency, streamlined designs that waste no energy, require no redundant systems, and operate with mathematical precision. His forearms gestured toward different sections of the hall, highlighting students from various species. The Etherians' pure energy-based consciousness, the Zephyrians' perfect collective intelligence, the Nereids' flawless aquatic adaptation. Each represents millions of years of refined evolution. Then his attention turned toward the back corner, and his tone shifted noticeably. We will also examine aberrations, the crude, overbuilt biological systems that emerge from chaotic environments. Deathworlds produce organisms with excessive redundancy, unnecessary strength, and primitive sensory systems, evolutionary mistakes that somehow manage to survive through brute force rather than elegance. Every being in the hall turned to stare at Hannah, who looked up from her tablet where she had been taking careful notes. She met the professor's gaze for a moment, nodded politely, as if acknowledging an introduction, then quietly returned to her, note-taking. The simple gesture somehow made the tension in the room even thicker. Here was a creature from a world so dangerous that it had shaped her species into something the galaxy's greatest minds couldn't fully comprehend. And she was sitting calmly in their most prestigious academic institution, taking notes with primitive tools like it was perfectly normal. Professor Veltar's mandibles clicked with barely concealed irritation at her casual dismissal of his pointed remarks, while around the hall, students whispered among themselves about the strange human who seemed completely unaware of the fear she inspired. The morning of the third day brought an unusual tension to Laboratory 7. The massive chamber stretched across 2 levels of the space station, filled with the most advanced scientific equipment the galaxy had to offer. Holographic displays showed rotating molecular structures, while quantum microscopes revealed details at the atomic level. The air hummed with the energy of countless machines working in perfect harmony. Students from across the known species filed into their assigned workstations, each equipped with specialized tools designed for their particular biology. The Etherian gas beings floated into containment fields that allowed them to interface directly with the equipment through energy manipulation. Zephyrian clusters positioned themselves around circular workstations where their collective consciousness could process multiple data streams simultaneously. At the far end of the lab, robotic assistants glided silently between stations, their sleek forms designed by the Synthec Collective, a race of artificial beings who had achieved consciousness 3 millennia ago. These AI helpers monitored each experiment, ensuring student safety while gathering data for the consortium's vast research databases. Hannah Kim found herself at Workstation 47, a standard human-compatible setup that looked almost primitive compared to the exotic equipment surrounding her. While other students interfaced with quantum computers through neural links or telepathic connections, she had to rely on manual controls and visual displays. Today's assignment focused on comparative skeletal analysis across different species. Each student had received bone samples from various civilizations, ranging from the silicon-based crystalline hierarchies to the metal-infused skeletal structures of the mechano-organic republics. The goal was to understand how different evolutionary pressures had shaped bone density, joint design, and structural efficiency. Hannah carefully positioned a Kalari bone fragment under her microscope, adjusting the focus with steady hands. The crystalline structure was beautiful in its complexity, layers of organized mineral deposits that created both flexibility and incredible strength. As she worked, she made detailed notes on her tablet, documenting molecular arrangements and stress distribution patterns. Around the lab, other students struggled with their assignments. A young Nereid in his water-filled workstation kept having to restart his analysis as the aquatic environment interfered with the delicate bone samples. 2 Karathi students worked together, their 8 legs allowing them to operate multiple instruments simultaneously, but their nervous energy made precision difficult. The most impressive sight was watching the Etherian students work. Their gas-form bodies would shift colors as they processed information, creating beautiful aurora-like displays that reflected their thought patterns. When they encountered something interesting, their entire being would pulse with excitement, sending ripples of light across their containment fields. Professor Veltar moved through the laboratory like a conductor orchestrating a complex symphony. His 4 crystalline arms operated independently, checking one student's work, while simultaneously reviewing another's data and adjusting equipment settings. The Kalari were known throughout the galaxy for their ability to multitask at levels that would overwhelm most species. As he approached Hannah's workstation, the professor's mandibles clicked with what could only be described as anticipation. He had been waiting for this opportunity since the semester began. The human girl had been too polite, too quiet, too perfectly behaved during his lectures. Today he would finally demonstrate to the class why Deathworld species had no place in civilized academic institutions. "Attention, class," Professor Veltar announced, his crystalline voice cutting through the laboratory's ambient hum. Students throughout the chamber paused their work and turned toward the commotion. Even the robotic assistants seemed to focus their sensors on the developing situation. "Gather around Workstation 47, the professor commanded. "I have an excellent opportunity to demonstrate the fundamental differences between properly evolved species and the crude adaptations found on Deathworld environments." Students began moving toward Hana's station with varying degrees of curiosity and concern. The Etherian beings dimmed their luminosity as they approached, a sign of nervousness among their species. Zephyrian clusters formed defensive formations, their compound eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. Even the massive Thurian rock beings, who feared very little in the galaxy, approached with unusual caution. Hana looked up from her microscope as the crowd gathered, blinking in mild confusion at the sudden attention. She had been completely absorbed in documenting the fascinating properties of the Kalari bone sample, noting how the crystalline structure could distribute impact forces across multiple vectors simultaneously. Without any warning or request for permission, Professor Veltar reached out with two of his forearms and grasped Hana's left arm. His crystalline appendages were cold against her skin, designed more for precision manipulation than the warmth of organic contact. "Observe the crude over-engineering typical of Deathworld evolution," he began, his voice taking on the tone of a lecturer dissecting a particularly interesting specimen. "Notice the excessive bone density, completely unnecessary for any civilized environment. The redundant muscle attachment points create inefficiency and waste valuable biological resources." As he spoke, the professor began manipulating Hana's arm like a piece of laboratory equipment, bending her elbow and rotating her wrist to demonstrate various points. His grip was firm and clinical, treating her limb as nothing more than an educational tool. Hana's dark eyes flicked between the professor's crystalline face and her microscope, where her important work sat incomplete. She had been making significant progress on understanding the Kalari bone structure, and the interruption was frustrating. But she had learned during her few weeks at the consortium that challenging professors directly was considered extremely rude in galactic academic culture. So, she remained silent, allowing the examination to continue while trying to take notes with her free hand. The laboratory's ambient lighting cast an eerie glow across the assembled students as Professor Veltar's demonstration entered its most dangerous phase. Around them, the advanced equipment of Laboratory 7 continued its quiet humming, quantum processors calculating complex molecular structures, while holographic displays rotated slowly in the air. The robotic assistants had moved closer, their sensors detecting rising stress levels among the organic beings present. Professor Veltar's 4 crystalline arms worked in coordination as he manipulated Hana's limb with increasing aggression. His species had evolved on a world where precision and efficiency were paramount, every movement calculated, every action serving a specific purpose. To him, the human arm he held was a perfect example of evolutionary waste and poor design. "Notice the crude joint construction," he announced to his captivated audience, forcing Hana's elbow to bend at an unnatural angle. Where civilized species have developed elegant, efficient connections, Deathworld creatures rely on brute force engineering. Multiple redundant systems, excessive bone density, primitive muscle fiber arrangements. The gathered students watched, in fascination and growing unease. A young Etherian being pulsed with nervous energy, her gas-form body shifting from blue to deep purple, a color that indicated distress among her people. The Zephyrian clusters had formed tight defensive circles, their compound eyes reflecting the laboratory's lights like tiny mirrors as they processed what they were witnessing. From across the lab, other students had begun to notice the commotion. A pair of Nereid scholars peered through their aquatic viewing ports, their gills fluttering with anxiety. Even the massive Thurian rock beings, who typically ignored most biological demonstrations, had turned their ancient stone faces toward the gathering crowd. Professor Veltar's grip tightened as he attempted to hyperextend Hannah's elbow joint, pushing it well beyond what would be comfortable for most species. His crystalline fingers dug into her skin as he applied steadily increasing pressure, treating her arm like a piece of equipment he was stress testing. "Observe how the joint resists proper extension," he continued, his voice taking on an almost manic quality. "A properly evolved being would have joints that flex smoothly, efficiently. This primitive construction fights against itself, creating internal stress that wastes energy and reduces performance." The robotic assistants began moving closer, their advanced AI systems detecting that the demonstration was exceeding safe parameters. Red warning lights began blinking on their sleek forms as they calculated the increasing probability of injury. However, their programming prevented them from interfering with authorized academic demonstrations unless specifically requested by the instructor. Throughout the increasingly uncomfortable display, Hannah remained focused on her microscope. The calorie bone sample under examination revealed fascinating secrets about crystalline growth patterns that could revolutionize materials science. She had discovered what appeared to be a previously unknown molecular arrangement that allowed the crystals to maintain strength while remaining flexible. Her dark eyes stayed fixed on the microscope's display as she tried to document her findings. With her free hand, the pen moved steadily across her tablet, recording measurements and observations, even as her other arm was being manipulated like a laboratory specimen. To the watching aliens, her ability to concentrate under such circumstances seemed almost supernatural. "Excuse me, Professor," Hannah said quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of laboratory equipment. She still hadn't looked up from her work. "Could you please adjust your grip? I'm trying to finish this analysis of your bone sample, and I think I've found something important." The request was polite, respectful, and completely reasonable, but Professor Veltar's mandibles flared wide with indignation, a display that in Kalari culture indicated extreme offense. The crystalline structures around his mouth began to glow with internal energy, casting dancing patterns of light across his angular face. "I'm conducting an educational demonstration, Deathworlder," he declared, his voice rising to a pitch that made several students wince. "Your primitive assignment can wait until I have finished showing the class your species' inferior biological design." The insult hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Across the galaxy, calling someone a Deathworlder was considered one of the most degrading terms possible, suggesting that their species was nothing more than barely civilized savages who had somehow stumbled into space travel. Several students gasped at the professor's blatant violation of academic courtesy protocols, but Hannah simply continued working, her pen moving steadily across the tablet as if she hadn't heard the slur at all. Professor Veltar's fury intensified at her apparent dismissal of his authority. He shifted his grip, now using 3 of his forearms to grasp her wrist and forearm with crushing force. The crystalline structures of his appendages began to glow brighter as he channeled more energy into his muscles, preparing to demonstrate the human joint's breaking point to his fascinated audience. "Watch closely," he announced to the crowd, "as I show you exactly how much stress these primitive joints can handle." Before, still focused entirely on her microscope, Hannah absent-mindedly reached over with her free hand. Her movement was casual, thoughtless, the same gesture someone might make to brush away an annoying insect or adjust a piece of equipment that had fallen out of place. She simply wanted to move one of the professor's arms so she could reach her data tablet more easily. The gentle touch lasted less than a second. The sound that followed was unlike anything the laboratory had ever heard, a sharp, crystalline crack that seemed to cut through reality itself. Professor Veltar's forearm, composed of the same crystalline material that had made his species famous throughout the galaxy for their durability and precision, snapped cleanly in half. Time seemed frozen as fragments of crystalline bone scattered across the polished laboratory floor like broken glass, each piece catching the light and throwing rainbow reflections across the walls. Professor Veltar's shriek of pain and shock echoed through the chamber. a sound so piercing that several emergency systems activated automatically. The great Professor Veltar, respected throughout 12 star systems for his academic achievements, collapsed to the floor beside his own scattered arm fragments, while the small human girl continued calmly taking notes about crystalline bone structures. The silence that followed Professor Veltar's scream lasted exactly 2.3 seconds before Laboratory 7 exploded into absolute chaos. Emergency alarms began blaring throughout the space station as automated systems detected a medical crisis. Red warning lights bathed the chamber in pulsing crimson, while the laboratory's AI announced in multiple languages that emergency protocols were now in effect. From hidden compartments in the walls, sleek medical drones burst forth like metallic angels. These advanced machines, designed by the Synthic Collective, moved with incredible precision as they swarmed around the fallen professor. Their sensors immediately began analyzing his vital signs, while emergency repair nanobots, deployed from their storage chambers, to begin containing the crystalline fragments of his shattered arm. The largest medical drone, designated Alpha 7, extended multiple appendages to stabilize Professor Veltar's injuries. Its smooth voice, designed to be calming across all known species, began providing updates in the professor's native Kalari language while simultaneously transmitting data to the station's medical bay. The drone's advanced AI quickly determined that while the injury was severe, it wasn't life-threatening. The professor had simply experienced what humans might call shock at having his supposedly indestructible crystalline arm broken so easily. Around the laboratory, students reacted with pure terror. The Zephyrian clusters, known throughout the galaxy for their collective intelligence and analytical thinking, had their compound eyes wide with disbelief. Their antennae twitched frantically as thousands of individual minds tried to process what they had witnessed. How could such a small, seemingly fragile creature possess enough strength to shatter crystalline bone with a casual touch? The Etherian gas beings, normally radiant with soft blue and green energy, had dimmed to barely visible wisps of light. In their species, dimming indicated extreme fear or shock. Several had retreated so far into their containment fields that they were nearly invisible, appearing as nothing more than faint sparkles in the air. But perhaps the most dramatic reaction came from Jin Park, a young Karathi student whose 8 legs had been perfectly balanced just moments before. The spider-like being took one look at the scattered crystal fragments, processed the implications of what he had witnessed, and promptly fainted. His segmented body collapsed with a soft thud, his legs curling inward as his nervous system shut down to protect itself from the overwhelming realization that he was sharing a classroom with something far more dangerous than his species' worst nightmares. Throughout the laboratory, other students pressed themselves against the walls, as far from Hana as possible. The massive Thurian rock beings, each standing 3 meters tall and composed of living stone, backed away with surprising speed for creatures of their size. Even the aquatic Nereid students had retreated deep into their water-filled chambers, their gills working rapidly as they hyperventilated in their liquid environment. Amidst this pandemonium, Hana Kim finally looked up from her microscope. She blinked several times, her dark eyes taking in the scene of chaos surrounding her workstation. Medical drones buzzed overhead, students cowered against the walls, alarms blared from every speaker, and Professor Veltar lay on the floor making sounds that her universal translator couldn't properly interpret. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, her voice carrying genuine confusion as she carefully set down her stylus. The question was so innocent, so completely divorced from the reality of what had just occurred, that several students actually whimpered in response. A young Etherian being named Lumi, one of the few students who had maintained any coherent thought patterns, pulsed with a sickly yellow color that indicated profound confusion among her people. How could the human not understand what had just happened? How could someone break another being's arm and seem genuinely puzzled by the resulting chaos? "I was just trying to adjust his grip so I could finish documenting this bone structure," Hana continued, gesturing toward her microscope where the Kalari sample still waited under examination. "I think I found something really interesting about the crystalline growth patterns that could help improve spacecraft hull designs." The casual way she discussed her discovery, while Professor Veltar writhed in pain just meters away, sent fresh waves of terror through the assembled students. This wasn't the behavior of a malicious creature. This was something far more frightening. This was a being so powerful that breaking bones was as unconscious and effortless as breathing. Within minutes, the laboratory doors burst open as campus security arrived in full tactical gear. The Galactic Consortium's security force was composed of members from the Aegis Mercenary Guild, professional soldiers who had served in conflicts across 17 star systems. These weren't ordinary campus guards. They were battle-hardened veterans equipped with weapons capable of stopping everything from rampaging, Titan-class war beasts to energy-based life forms. Yet as they entered Laboratory 7 with weapons drawn, their hands were visibly trembling. The lead security officer, a scarred Karathi veteran named Captain Voss, had read every available file on human capabilities. He knew that Earth was classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, and he understood what that classification meant. But reading reports and confronting the reality were entirely different experiences. The security team's advanced scanners immediately began analyzing the scene, documenting the scattered crystal fragments and the precise nature of Professor Veltar's injury. Their equipment confirmed what their eyes could barely believe. The professor's crystalline arm, composed of materials stronger than most spacecraft hulls, had been snapped cleanly in half by what appeared to be minimal force. "Should I help clean up these crystal fragments?" Hannah offered helpfully, already reaching for a collection tray from her workstation. "I don't want anyone to step on them and get hurt." The innocent offer to help clean up the remains of her professor's arm nearly caused Captain Voss to drop his weapon. With carefully controlled panic, he gestured for Hannah to remain exactly where she was, while his team established a security perimeter around her workstation. As the medical drones carefully lifted Professor Veltar onto an emergency stretcher, his crystalline eyes managed to focus on Hannah's workstation display. Even through his pain and shock, his academic mind couldn't help but process what he saw there. Her analysis of the Kalari bone sample was absolutely flawless, more detailed, more insightful, and more accurate than graduate-level work he had, reviewed from students who had spent decades studying xenobiology. The human girl had not only broken his arm without apparent effort, but she had also produced the most brilliant analysis of Kalari crystalline structure he had ever encountered. As the medical team carried him away toward the emergency bay, Professor Veltar realized with growing horror that everything the Galactic Consortium thought they knew about Deathworld species was catastrophically wrong. The medical bay aboard, Kepler-7 station hummed with advanced healing technology. As Professor Veltar lay propped against biofoam pillows, his shattered arm encased in a glowing regeneration matrix. The crystalline healing chamber worked tirelessly to rebuild his damaged limb, but the process would take weeks. Around him, holographic displays showed his vital signs, while robotic medical assistants monitored his recovery with mechanical precision. 4. The 10th time that day, the professor activated the security footage from Laboratory 7. The three-dimensional recording materialized above his bed, showing every angle of the incident in perfect detail. Advanced sensors had captured not just the visual events, but also stress readings, force measurements, and biological responses from every being present. What the footage revealed was deeply disturbing to everything Professor Veltar thought. He understood about the universe. Frame-by-frame analysis showed that Hannah had applied virtually no force when she moved his arm. The sensors registered her touch as lighter than what most species would use to pet a small animal. Yet somehow that gentle contact had generated enough precise pressure to snap crystalline bone that could withstand meteor impacts. The medical AI, a sophisticated program designed by the Synthec Collective, had run countless simulations trying to understand the physics involved. Its conclusion was troubling. Either the sensors had malfunctioned, or the human girl possessed strength so far beyond galactic norms that their measuring equipment couldn't properly calibrate it. Dr. Yanis Chen, the station's chief medical officer, and the only other human aboard Kepler-7, visited Professor Veltar regularly during his recovery. Unlike his patient counterpart Hannah, Dr. Chen had spent decades working with alien species and understood their perspectives better than most of his kind. The review board completed their investigation. Dr. Chen informed the professor during one of his visits. They found no evidence of malicious intent. Your student was simply trying to continue her work while you were conducting your demonstration. Professor Veltar's mandibles clicked with embarrassment. The security footage made his behavior look exactly like what it was, academic bullying taken to a dangerous extreme. He had treated a student like a laboratory specimen, ignoring her polite requests to stop, and had paid the price for his arrogance. More troubling was Hana's academic file, which Dr. Chen had shared with the professor's permission. Her grades, across all subjects, were exceptional. Quantum physics, perfect scores. Galactic history, top of her class. Advanced mathematics, solving problems that challenged graduate students. Her professor's comments were unanimous in their praise for her work ethic, respectful behavior, and genuine curiosity about alien cultures. The Etherian professor who taught her interspecies communication had written, "Hana demonstrates remarkable cultural sensitivity and goes to great lengths to avoid causing offense. She studies our customs with the dedication of a diplomat." Her stellar engineering instructor, a massive Thurian rock being, noted, "Student Kim approaches complex problems with patience and precision. She never rushes to solutions and double-checks all calculations to ensure accuracy." Most impressive was her comparative biology essay, written just days before the incident. In it, Hana had analyzed 17 different species' evolutionary adaptations, showing deep respect for each civilization's unique development. She had concluded the paper by noting how much humans could learn from other species' more elegant biological solutions. The academic council met in emergency session to discuss Hana's case. Representatives from 12 different species gathered in the station's main conference chamber, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, hums, and energy pulses as they debated what to do with their most unusual student. Chancellor Vexithara, an ancient Etherian being whose gas-form body pulsed with centuries of accumulated wisdom, led the discussion. The security footage had been reviewed by experts from across the galaxy, and their conclusions were unanimous. Hana Kim represented no threat to anyone except those who chose to physically assault her. The decision was made to transfer her to the graduate-level xenobiology program, where she would work with professors who had been thoroughly briefed on proper protocols for interacting with Deathworld species. The advanced classes were smaller, more focused, and taught by instructors who understood that academic excellence came in many forms. Dr. Kethara, a respected Nereid scholar whose aquatic biology expertise was legendary throughout the galaxy, volunteered to be Hana's new instructor. She had spent years studying Deathworld ecosystems and understood better than most how such environments shaped their inhabitants. Her underwater laboratory was equipped with specialized equipment that allowed students from various species to work together safely. On Hana's first day in the advanced program, she found herself in a seminar room that held only 12 students. A carefully selected group of the station's most promising xenobiology researchers. The chamber was smaller than her previous lecture hall, but far more sophisticated, with holographic displays capable of showing molecular-level biological processes in real time. Dr. Kethara floated in her specialized aquatic pod, her graceful fins moving as she spoke through the chamber's translation system. "Today we begin our exploration of genetic adaptation mechanisms across extreme environments," she announced, her voice carrying the musical quality typical of her species. Throughout the lecture, Hana sat in the front row, taking careful notes. With the same dedication she had shown in her previous class, her pen moved steadily across her tablet as she documented complex genetic matrices and evolutionary pressure points. The other students, while maintaining respectful distances, no longer showed the outright terror that had characterized her earlier academic experience. During the break, a young Zephyrian student named Kixtel approached her workstation, the insectoid being moved cautiously, its compound eyes reflecting nervous energy, but curiosity had overcome its species' natural caution. Kixtel had been among the witnesses to the Laboratory 7 incident, and questions had been burning in its collective consciousness for weeks. "Can I ask you something?" Kixtel began, its translated voice carrying the harmonic undertones typical of hive mind species. When Professor Veltar's arm broke, you were holding back, weren't you?" Hannah looked up from her notes with genuine surprise, as if the question had never occurred to her. "Of course I was holding back," she replied matter-of-factly. "I know how fragile you all are compared to things back on Earth." She paused, her expression becoming thoughtful as she considered her words. "Though I guess I didn't realize quite how fragile until that happened. On my world, that would barely have been enough force to move a flower petal." The casual comparison sent chills through Kixtel's exoskeleton. The Zephyrian's compound eyes widened as the full implications hit its collective consciousness. If that gentle touch represented the force needed to move a flower on Earth, what did that say about the world that had produced this seemingly delicate human girl? As Kixtel backed away slowly, its mind racing with new understanding, other students throughout the chamber began to truly comprehend what they were dealing with. Hannah Kim wasn't just a student from a dangerous world. She was living proof that some planets were so hostile that they created beings capable of incredible feats while remaining completely unaware of their own power. The small human girl continued, taking notes about genetic matrices, completely oblivious to the profound impact her simple statement had made on every alien mind present. In trying to be reassuring, she had accidentally revealed a truth that would reshape how the galaxy viewed Deathworld species forever. Dr. Kethara observed the interaction from her aquatic pod, her fins moving with what might have been amusement. She had suspected that the Galactic Consortium's understanding of Deathworld inhabitants was incomplete. Now she was certain of it. Outside the seminar room's windows, the three purple suns of the Kepler system continued their eternal dance, their light reflecting off the space station's hull as it rotated slowly through the void. Inside, a new chapter in interspecies understanding had begun, all because one polite human girl had wanted to finish her homework. The end.